Previously on Serial with Harka, Riley, and Lauren. Information from the last episode led us to a new suspect, Ronald Lee Moore. Ronald Lee Moore was a long-shot suspect, but in episode 12 he was brought up as a possible suspect. He was previously convicted for rape, sexual assault, and robberies. He was let out of federal prison on January 1st, 1999, and Hae-Min Lee was murdered on January 13th, 1999. He was also known for being in and out of prison a lot, and when he was out of prison, he was very active. Deidre Enright says, he said during that time he was out, we linked him to 2 rapes and a murder, and the motives in all of them appeared to be burglary, but he'd always have sex with the people, from episode 12. Another point is that Ronald Lee Moore had been charged with another murder of Annalise Lee, and she was also Korean. Usually, if you are a serial killer, you have a type of people. For example, Ted Bundy liked young girls, especially with brown hair. This leads us to believe that Ronald Lee Moore killed Hae-Min Lee because it would make sense because of previous killings. Also, Sarah says, Annalise Hung Suk Lee, I believe she was also Korean. She was 27 when she was killed, strangled in her apartment in Owings Mill. She was found on December 13th, 1999, exactly 11 months after Hae disappeared from episode 12. This piece of evidence is showing that Hae's killing and Annalise's killing has similarities. For example, they were both Korean, they were both fairly young, they were both strangled, and also, Owings Mill is also in Maryland, very close to where Hae lived. Also, in episode 12, Sarah says, they tested some old DNA and a match came back to this other guy who'd done other crimes, mostly burglaries. This is helpful because it showed that Ronald Lee Moore had something to do with the disappearance of Hae-Min Lee because of his DNA that was at the crime scene. So why did they test his DNA before? And why aren't they more suspicious of Ronald Lee Moore? All of this evidence makes me very suspicious and has convinced me that Ronald Lee Moore is the killer of Hae-Min Lee.
Adnan Syed was sentenced to life sentence in prison for the first-degree murder of Hae-Min Lee, an 18-year-old high school student. Adnan and Hae were known to be dating before and having an on-and-off relationship. They broke up right before Christmas of 1998, and soon after the breakup, Hae started to date Dawn. When the detectives asked Jay about how Adnan was after the breakup, he said that Adnan felt heartbroken and that Adnan said he was going to kill Hae. The motive for Adnan to kill Hae was that he became enraged. He felt betrayed that his honor had been besmirched, and he became very angry, and he set out to kill Hae-Min Lee. This was a prosecution opening statement presented to us in episode 2. The prosecution provides this motive that is reasonable considering the situation that Adnan and Hae were previously in. All of Hae's and Adnan's friends said that Adnan seemed fine after the breakup, although he was a bit sad. But he could have hid his feelings and planned to hurt, or in this case, kill Hae. He might have shown his true feelings in front of Jay, who said that Adnan felt heartbroken and asked Jay to assist him with the murder. Jay was the main witness in this case, and he helped bury Hae's dead body. He also knew what happened that day. He told the detectives about the details that happened that day. For example, the timing of what happened and where it happened. The call logs provided in episode 5 match up almost exactly with Jay's story of what happened that day of Hae-Min Lee's murder. Although Jay's story contained some inconsistencies, his story matches the call logs, which is nearly impossible to fabricate. The story matched the location and the time of what Jay included as part of his explanation from that day. There may not have been enough evidence to say that Adnan committed the crime for sure, but the evidence that is provided in previous episodes are inclined towards Adnan being the actual murderer.
Jay Wilds is one of the biggest mysteries of the whole case. He knew where Hae's car was, his stories are very inconsistent. He claims to have helped bury the body, and he took major precautions for someone who claims to not be involved. Inconsistency right there. It is also believed that there is no payphone, phone booth, or public phone at the Best Buy. These points really add up against Jay because he is found caught in many lies. We find out in episode 4 that Jay took major precautions, such as wiping the shovels clean in case of fingerprints and throwing his clothes and boots away at his work, even though Jen claims Jay wasn't along when the body was buried. Jay wouldn't have taken those precautions if he didn't bury the body. However, late in the episode, we find out Jay changes his story. In the first taped interview, Jay refuses to dig the grave, but in the second tape, he claims him and Adnan, both dug the hole. Jay states in episode 4, I'm the criminal element of Woodlawn, perceived reputation. It's like how the student body sees me. You know, you get a certain reputation and it kind of sticks with you. To add to this, Kathy, one of Jay's friends, states, the first thing that popped into my head was, Jay lies. That's why he does that. Jay lies about everything. Jay doesn't tell the truth. Episode 8. Jay is seen as a criminal and has a bad reputation. He is also notorious for lying and is infamous for being a bad guy. This means Jay could be lying about Adnan's involvement to be covering and saving his butt. If Jay doesn't tell the truth to his friends, how are the cops supposed to trust him? How is the state supposed to believe everything he says and build their whole case on some lying drug dealer's inconsistent stories? They shouldn't. Nobody should trust Jay because he is known for consistently lying and for being a criminal. Does this not add up? All of this can be used to validate Jay's guilt and heavy involvement in the murder. The new evidence provided in episode 20 of Crime Junkie led us to believe that all of our suspects may not be the actual murderer. The new podcast points us to Don.
Serial said that Don had an alibi, but that could have been fabricated because he worked under supervision of his mom. He worked in a different store that day, and the manager of that store was his stepmom.
Meaning Don's time card could have easily been changed by either manager. Don worked in LensCrafter store, but his ID would be the same no matter where he worked in. This wasn't the case. Time card was recorded under a different ID number that day.
This wouldn't make any sense because the ID number used is one that is less than his mom's ID, which means that it could have been assigned before his mom, so they would have been working there for a while.
This was the first time Don ever used a different number. The Crime Junkie podcast also states that the manager can change the time for up to a week, which is before the pay date. The times were also changed the day the cops officially interviewed Don. However, how did Don and his moms know to change the alibi if no one knew Hay was dead? This is super suspicious.
Why was it he worked later in the afternoon as a lab tech, but this job didn't exist until after Hay's murder, and the timings for this job were supposed to be earlier in the day. The cops also weren't able to reach Don until 1:30 that night.
All of this evidence could point to Don being the true suspect.
Sarah was able to find Adnan's alibi, Asia McLean. Asia claims to have been talking to Adnan in the library at the time the state believes that Hay was murdered. She gives a credible account of the day. She says she remembers the day well because it was the first snow of the year.
Jay, his whole story falls apart in Crime Junkie. His stories would change after the police found new evidence, and most of these changes were proved to be wrong.
For Ronald, well, we hardly know anything about him. Crime Junkie states that the person who killed Hay was most likely someone she knew and was comfortable meeting up with. Her murderer probably paged her earlier that day and asked her to meet somewhere. It was also believed that the person wasn't in the school with her because they would have been paging her to meet up somewhere after school if they could talk and see each other at school.
Ronald, Adnan, Jay, and now Don have sufficient evidence for them to be the murderer. But who is it if all of them have evidence that points to them?
We have no way of knowing who did it, so we need to do further investigation. Until then, we really can't make assumptions because there could be more evidence that points to any one of our suspects or a totally new suspect.
On Serial.